And one of the things which is implied in the scriptures and which we see happening now is that they're going to use the kind of global chaos and fear to create a spirit in people in which they're going to accept the demands of a coming Antichrist government. So people are going to be afraid and they're going to do what the government tells them to do. And actually the climate conference has just another example of that taking place. What's the spirit behind it? Said we've got all kinds of apocalyptic statements coming out, warning of coming destruction. Told you one from Boris Johnson, we're at 1 minute to midnight. And Prince Charles has said we need a vast military-style campaign to marshal the strength of the global private sector with trillions at its disposal. It's surely time to launch a substantial green recovery by putting the global economy on a confident, sustainable trajectory, thus save our planet. A vast military-style campaign with trillions at its disposal. Otherwise, we're going to fry and be doomed. That's what they're telling us. And Prince Charles is actually pretty much in with the World Economic Foundation and all the people who are behind this, by the way. David Attenborough said the human story could come to an end unless immediate action is taken to tackle climate change. And you got statements from the UN Secretary General, the Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury, all saying pretty much the same thing. You've got the BBC, the mainstream media, telling this message over and over again, in fact, almost nothing else. Governments, this is what I got off the BBC website, governments must promise more ambitious cuts in warming gases if we're to prevent greater global temperature rise. The summit in Glasgow is where change must happen. The world's biggest polluters must commit to reduce and ultimately eliminate carbon burning in order to save the world. Our lives must change. Decisions made here will impact our jobs, how we heat our homes, what we eat, how we travel, and so on. Note the word must here. And there's a kind of compulsion which is being put upon us because the majority of climate scientists predict a catastrophic 3 to 4 degrees centigrade rise in global temperatures unless we do this. In this case, humanity and much of the planet, they're telling us, is doomed. So you've got to cut back the use of fossil fuels in order to survive or die. It really is kind of an apocalyptic doomsday message. 1 minute to midnight. And they say also that this message has a warning and a hope. Hope that if they get it right, then we'll be okay. So what do you think? Is it right? Now, I want to say, first of all, I understand a lot about the environment situation. Genesis 1 says that God gave mankind the responsibility to look after the earth, basically, under his control. He gave us the creation mandate. It's kind of lost because of Genesis 3, the fall of man, but basically human beings were put on the earth by God in order to look after the earth as the highest of his creation. And I agree that we shouldn't be dumping plastic in the sea, we shouldn't be burning down forests, we should be recycling waste. I agree that coal is a problem in terms of the atmosphere. However, there is an agenda which I don't agree with. And there's an agenda which you need to be aware of on this whole situation concerning what they call anthropomorphic global warming, in other words, man-made global warming. And there are reasons why we do question some of the things which are being told. Now, Boris Johnson said that the reason for the problem is, quote, the human race is covering the earth with an invisible and suffocating blanket of CO2, raising the temperature on the earth, of the planet, with a speed and abruptness that is entirely man-made. That's what he said last week. 2015, he actually rubbished that statement, but he's been converted in the meantime to the climate change agenda. It's the central idea of the climate change. In other words, by burning fossil fuels, the human race is creating a heat blanket over the earth, which causes heat to be reflected back to the earth and raises temperatures. You get the picture? The more we burn, the thicker the blanket becomes and the higher the temperature goes. The only solution, therefore, is to cut back and eventually eliminate burning of fossil fuels so that the heat can escape into the atmosphere. It's what we're told all the time on BBC, in the education system, and so on, by the scientists. A little booklet here. I've only got one copy left, unfortunately, but I can get some more if you want them. It's very scientific, and if you're not scientific, you might find it difficult to follow, called Climate Change, What We Know and What We Don't Know. A lecture by a man called Professor Murray Selby, written by Mike Sasseler, and basically it questions that whole agenda. Says it's without foundation in science. Says actually that the climate is much more complex. And I've also got about 150 pages of articles showing the flaws in the theory, which I could send you by email on my computer. Climate is actually immensely complex, which is affected by the sun, the ocean currents, the wind direction, and cloud cover. There are many things which we actually can't affect. Also, at the present time, we're seeing an absence of sunspots, which causes a weakening of the sun and affects the jet stream, wind direction, and ultimately is going to create global cooling. Also, there's a change in what we call the El Nino and La Nina current in the Pacific. El Nino is when the warm water is on the surface, and it's now been changed to La Nina, where the cold water is on the surface. Both of those are going to actually cause colder weather and global cooling. Now, if you follow global warming propaganda, they never mention anything about this. But the fact is that actually the temperature is at the moment pretty well flatlining, and some are saying it's going to go colder. Last winter, in both the north and the southern hemisphere, the temperatures were very much colder than usual. There was above average amounts of snow. Antarctica had its coldest weather ever recorded in the southern winter just now. They don't tell you that on the BBC, and they don't tell you that in much of the things which you're hearing. In fact, already this winter in the northern hemisphere, I've read that the areas in the far north, in Alaska, Siberia, north of Scandinavia, they've had unusually cold weather with unusually high levels of snow. Been large amounts of snow falling on the Alps, in the Himalayas, and in the Rocky Mountains in America, above average for this time of year. And some are projecting actually that the temperature was going to go down, which would be embarrassing for the global warming, but they say, well, they'll somehow manage to blame that on global warming anyway. But the fact is that this is not the kind of computer models which they're given, which a lot of this is based on, are not actually working out in what's really happening. Melanie Phillips, anyone know Melanie Phillips? She's a journalist, says a lot of sensible things. She wrote an article which said, there's no evidence that today's climate is displaying anything other than the normal fluctuations in climate patterns over the centuries. Predictions of climate apocalypse are based on dodgy computer modeling, laughably inconsistent measurements of temperature, and outright falsifications of the evidence. A man called Robert Morrison, she quotes, the suggestion is an unproven scientific hypothesis based on the output of climate models that over a 30-year period have yet to record an accurate forecast among them. In other words, the forecasts have been wrong. Remember Al Gore's film, The Inconvenient Truth? Going to be no more ice in the Arctic. You won't see snow again. Well, there's actually growing ice in the Arctic. It hasn't gone away. It says, in total contradiction of the core belief that rising CO2 levels inevitably and inescapably drive global temperatures upward, satellite and surface measurements show that there has been no global warming for 7 years. Then says how the journalists and so on kind of screen that out. They say that the claims are based on extreme weather, what we used to call bad weather. Says heat, cold, rain or drought, everyone is a winner and is used by the media to prove global warming. Of course, cherry-picking individual weather events and blaming it on long-term changes in the climate is about as unscientific as you can get. And not a scintilla of credible proof has yet been produced to back up the claims. We know for certain that if humans cause all or most global warming by burning fossil fuels, we don't know for certain if humans cause all of most global warming by burning fossil fuels, but it seems highly unlikely. From around 1945 to the late 1970s, there was a fall in global temperatures, and an almost unanimous fear was global cooling. Then the temperature rose for 20 years, leading to the settled science of global warming. Now it's flattening and possibly heading for cooling, so Armageddon beckons with extreme weather. Is CO2 to blame? Well, humans only contribute 3% of all CO2 entering the atmosphere. If we destroy our industrial lifestyle by cutting our modest contribution, can we be sure the other 97% will behave itself in a world that is naturally warming a little, as it has done countless times in the past? On the basis of an uncertain hypothesis which has become an argument-free agenda, you are not allowed to question, for most members of the mainstream media, politicians, activists, state-sponsored scientists and subsidy-hungry industrialists, that we are embarking on net zero with little idea or seemingly care of the disastrous effect it will have on human society across the globe. Almost every new technology to replace our existing cheap and reliable power has severe disadvantages and heavy costs. The warnings of green disaster have long been evident. 2018, the long-established Institution of Engineers and Shipbuilders in Scotland warned that Scottish and UK government green energy policy was likely to lead to severe electricity blackouts. Such events, it warned, lead to death, severe societal and industrial disruption, civil disturbance and loss of production. Few know that about all the many distinguished scientists who say man-made global warming theory is false, because no mainstream media outlets give them a platform. In 2006, the BBC decided to stop giving any airtime to climate change skeptics. Thus, the BBC is no more than a propaganda outfit for climate change. And you've seen that this is actually a pattern you see in other areas as well. That certain opinions which go against what they want you to say just screened out of the media. They want to get it out of social media. They want to stop people preaching about it in churches like me. And you're going to see that this pressure to suppress any view which goes against the mainstream. And yet, there are reasons why you should question some of this stuff that's going on.